Welcome to Watching Silent Films. My name's Yifong, and on this podcast, we pick a movie or a series of movies, we watch it, and talk about it. You're on with my co-hosts Bob and Lily. Greetings.
Hey, guys.
Hello.
Hey guys.
Hello.
Hello, hello. So, for this week, we're going to be doing Buster Keaton shorts from the 1920s onward. And there's going to be a series of 5 shorts we're going to talk about. And but before that, we kind of dive in. Have you guys seen anything in the classic realm most recently?
No.
No, not this
Nothing
week.
this week.
No worries.
Yeah, same.
I don't think I had either. All right. Well, with that in mind, let's dive in. So it is actually quite a lot. I was watching it and I hadn't realized how each of them were fairly long in spite of being short, quote unquote. So a 2-reeler could be somewhere from 15 to 20 minutes, you know. And you add them up, it could just be hours. So I just found that interesting. What are you guys' thoughts about Buster Keaton? Like, what do you know about him? What are your thoughts about him?
Love him.
Like from previous experience that you know before you watch these shorts. What have you seen from him in the past?
Well, we covered the general. And,
That's right, we did. I forgot about that.
Just the general. I feel like if I ever saw anything involving him, it was clips from that film of him on the train doing something wild, and that's probably it, to be honest.
I would agree with that same thing with me. I mean, I've seen plenty of tributes to him of many of his works, but never watched the films themselves. And just his, he's really into it. You know, that's the thing you can tell about him. It's like, he's always got that serious, plain expression for the most part, which in itself, for everything he's doing, is a talent.
You're
It's
talking
like
about his deadpan face?
Yeah, it's like staying in character while he's doing it all.
I think I may have mentioned in the general, pretty sure, but essentially he grew up in a vaudeville family.
Mm-hmm.
Both of his parents were in vaudeville, so he literally was born into it.
Right.
And by age 5, he was being thrown around by his dad, and
right, yeah, we did talk about that. But
and he was laughing because he enjoyed it, but it got less laughs from the audience because it was just like, "What's this?" So he ended up adopting this deadpan face. The more deadpan he was, the more laughter he got from the audience, and that's where his deadpan was born. So, age 3, actually, in Wilmington, Delaware, 1899. Actually, his dad appears in Scarecrow. Joe Keaton, his dad was the father of the girl.
Oh, really? Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
That is neat.
Yeah.
He seemed pretty quirky, too. I got that vibe off of him.
You could see the biological similarity once they're standing next to each other. You're like, oh. I mean, if you know about that fact anyway. But
Was that the same guy who's also in Neighbors?
I
There's
don't.
a couple
know.
actors that were in multiple movies.
I mean, they all look
noticed that right
similar.
away. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't think he was in Neighbors. I know he was
okay.
in Scarecrow. Maybe, yeah, probably, yeah. Joe Keaton, yeah, he was in there too. Neighbors. He kind of had his family come along for a lot of the movies, you know. But so he essentially got his career. I don't know if I'm repeating things. Maybe I am. But he got his start with by being in the Talmadge Studios in New York City, and he was kind of just visiting the studio one day, and all of a sudden, like, you know, they noticed him and like, let's start working, and he just got drafted, essentially working. But of course, you know, people like him come from the vaudeville stage, and so when you can tell that a person like that has already at age, whatever age he got into, he was incredibly experienced already. And so by the time he got into business, sometime in 1917, he started working for Metro under Joe Schenck. Ultimately, he had a tremendous amount of experience. I mean, if you've been working on the vaudeville stage on stage 3. And so it would just be easy, kind of plug and play into all of the entire gags. Now he met Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle at the studio. And they actually worked together for about 14 shorts right into the 1920s, 1917 and 1920s. So that's why later on, when some of the history, right? With Fatty Arbuckle got sort of his reputation got screwed up because of the death of the actress Virginia Rapp and all that stuff. So, and he was one of the defenders because they kind of came up together in this sort of tradition from the stage to film, and they have some sort of history, professional history together.
Yeah, that's a tragic story.
It is. But I'm not going to get into that story, but it's fascinating that these shorts that you're seeing now, which are his first shorts, have a lot of Fatty Arbuckle-esque caricatures. So they're not Fatty Arbuckle, but you can tell that he's kind of like replicating that. In fact, he's got the same gags from those 14 shorts. A lot of these vaudeville acts, including the Marx Brothers, much later in the Sounder and the Talkies, they would take stuff they've worked on for years on stage, and because you don't, like, if you haven't physically seen them on stage and they would repeat it on film, you wouldn't know because you've never seen them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But people who have ever seen them actually perform live on stage, they're like, oh, well, it's the same thing. It's like, have you seen those comedians in general? Comedians, write their material and prepare it, like most comedians, right?
Right.
And so like a comedians who tour, if they don't sort of refresh the material, like if you see them in one city, you go to the next city, they tour, it's the same exact thing. It's the same sets.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's not like
right.
he's writing different sets for every city, right?
No, it's a performance just like a stage troupe would.
Exactly. So it's the same thing with the vaudeville, is that there are certain acts that they're really good at, and whatever they're good at, they'll kind of retain that, and even throughout most of Keaton's life, he would kind of bring it back, every once a decade, I would say, so, for the rest of his life. So. Anyway, I think I did put some background in general, so if you guys want to kind of fill in some of the background of who sort of Buster Keaton was, because The General was one of his last movies. In fact, that movie basically tanked his career, especially around the turn of the end of the silent era and the beginning of the talkies. Tragically,
that's because it cost a lot too, right? It made less than it earned less than it took to make. That was the deal, right?
Yeah, it cost a lot of money to make, and ultimately tanked it. So, and it wasn't discovered until decades later. People, now favor it as a classic, but in its initial run, most people didn't pay attention to it, which happens a lot for classics. But that's what happened. But anywho, let's start with The High Sign. So this was released much later, 21, but he actually made this in early, either 20 or maybe earlier than that. In his first movie that he made here, the first short rather, the two-reeler, once he created it, he actually didn't like it, Buster Keaton, and he actually shelved the movie.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't released until a couple of years later when he injured himself. He actually injures himself quite frequently across his life, funnily enough, or not.
I heard that he, in filming something, he broke his neck, and he didn't find out about it until later when a doctor told him.
Yeah, decades later. It's a big water tank, and he got like, the water would hit him, and that jolt, that energy broke parts of his neck, and he didn't realize until decades later when his doctor's like, "Did you realize this happened?" He's like, "Oh, now it explains a lot of the pain."
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
That's crazy, but yeah, it's kind of like the Daredevil type mentality, you know. And he grew up with it, and I don't think he knew. I would say he liked it, and also he didn't knew any other way to do it, if that makes sense. Because of his vaudeville background, he was like, "This is the only way to be entertaining, of the highest quality and caliber." And from that point forth, he basically, would continue that trend. And if you're young, you tend not to get hurt as much. But it's when you're older, that's when you get bruised up more. So, yeah. But let's talk about the high sign first, because, and just for the listener, we're going to talk about these 5 here. The high sign, 1 week, Convict, 13 Neighbors, and the Scarecrow. I think that'd be the last one. So let's start with the high sign. The high sign is Buster Keaton plays a drifter who cons his way into working in an amusement park shooting gallery. Believing Buster is an expert marksman, both the murderous gang, the blinking buzzards, and the man they want to kill end up hiring him. The film ends with a wild chase through a house filled with secret passageways. So, again, this is the first initial sort of written, directed by Buster Keaton, also Ed Cline, who also worked with what's his name? W.C.
Fields?
Later, yes. So Ed Cline has had a long career after this, but anyway, they worked together to create these series of shorts. So what did you guys think of this one?
I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. And
It was,
go ahead.
It was, blah. I was going to say it was a good way to start the set because it was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. And the mania of it, and the going in and out and up and down, and that whole thing was really amazing. The choreography of the whole thing. I should explain that. Let's see. They were. Hold on a second. I lost my train of thought.
It's kind of like a he's kind of a technician, and he likes to build sets. Like there was an angle of 4 separate rooms.
Yeah, and like there's a trap door. But they were going through the wall. It actually, you get lost following it, but everything works together really nicely.
Yeah. It's just the way that he loves to play with the technical sort of engineering. So not only was he a brilliant comedian with the deadpan face, and he just moved in a certain way, I feel like was unique to himself, but he also was an engineer. And I think that's one of the aspects of his career that most people don't either pay attention to or don't care about or whatever it was.
Yeah. You notice that he uses, he likes to play with the concepts of like calculus, like
yes,
physics, the physics of how things work. He loves counterweights and motion, and he uses it together to make things that are impossible happen.
Essentially, it's all comes down to gag with the set, right? Like the physical set of the house and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I also love like in the copies that we're watching now is heavily restored. Like it was much worse condition than it was previously, but in this restored copy, you could even zoom in and you could tell like those villainous type characters, the really tall guy. I don't remember his name, but so it's the tall guy, and then there's like the various characters. If you look at their face makeup, you could see the really dark, eyeshadow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very
and
theatrical
very
makeup again.
heavy character makeup.
Exactly.
Now he seemed like the head of the blinking buzzards, but was he was that guy the really big guy that wasn't Fatty Arbuckle?
No, he hasn't. He's not. Arbuckle's not in any of these shorts that you watched.
Oh,
But
okay.
again, that's why I mention it, because he looks very similar, right? He has this
Right.
he's archetypal sort of
Similar build.
Yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of his stuff, he tries to put that sort of character, like that archetypical character in his shorts
see.
for contrast, because almost like he's kind of used to that from
Yeah.
a filming perspective.
That guy is actually really huge.
Right. So.
Yeah, I actually ended up looking how tall Buster Keaton was, just because I was wondering if they had to get all shorter actors for that scene when they're in the Blinking Buzzards hideout. And Buster
Right.
Keaton's was only 5'5", and like that's shorter for a man.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I was surprised to learn that, but I don't know, doesn't matter.
The blinking buzzards also cracked me up hysterically. I mean, the sign, the high sign that they used with they would spread their hands and touch their nose. It just absolutely cracked me up,
Yeah.
especially when he's running from the police officer and he stops at this food stand and and he tries to explain to the officer with the high sign, and the food stand guy sees him and knocks the cop out. And then gives him the sign and says, "Ha ha, I'm on your side."
Everybody's in on it. Everybody's
Yeah.
in on it. Yeah. But also, he would just randomly throw that sign, I think, throughout the movie.
He did it in the end.
Yeah.
Like it had become habit to do it.
Yeah. But I think he would just randomly throw, even if there weren't any Buzzards gang and anywhere near. I think he was being chased, and he just randomly threw it. So I love that randomness. So, but yeah, anything else with this particular short?
I mean, I like the giant newspaper gag. That was pretty
Oh,
good.
that was so funny. That was a riot. He likes to throw the unexpected in there. Well, I don't know which one it was. When the banana peel got thrown on the sidewalk, and he walked along and stepped over it like without even noticing it. It's like hysterical.
Well, I mean, that's the playing against type. The type is
Exactly.
that you would expect to slip on it, and that's the
Exactly.
gag. But the gag is the antithesis of that gag. And
Yeah, exactly.
So
it
it's
was
like,
it
no.
was perfect. It was so perfect.
right. And I think that dog is actually Arbuckle's actual dog, because they're pretty close friends. So he loaned his dog out for that. This maybe it was either this or Scarecrow. Can't remember, one or the other. But
Loan his dog.
yeah, acting. Any other thoughts about this particular short, The High Signs?
I think it was this one where he was in the chase scene with the cop walking.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I just like that one too, where it's just another one of the gags, but chasing, walking, chasing, turn around. I don't know. It just was really comical.
It's kind of like a cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's some of the Bugs Bunny type gags, which would obviously pay homage to his stuff, but Buster Keaton.
Was when he was what Lily was mentioning, was that when he was going down the street and they all formed in line like soldiers?
Oh, that's Convict 13.
That's Convict 13, right?
That's the other one, yeah. But the concept is the same, right? In here, he replaced the cop. He took the cop's gun for shooting practice.
Oh yeah,
But then he replaced it with the banana, which obviously
that's right.
the cop hadn't checked his gun since the banana's been there. But whatever. So he's like,
He pulled a banana on the guy.
yeah. So the banana gags,
Hold it right there, or I'll squeeze
Yeah.
this banana.
So that's the big one here. That's his breakout short. He's co-starring with Arbuckle and other people prior to this.
Was
So
that literally the first short he had made?
Oh no, this is the short that he directed, and
I
he
see.
personally had this artistic input in it. Not that he didn't on the other ones, but that the other ones was more. He was a hired hand, right? And he
Gotcha.
would work these sort of comedic shorts with Arbuckle and other. So I can't remember. Again, maybe I'm repeating myself, so I'm apologizing. But these type of sort of silent comedies, they are generally done with a team of gagmen, right? Nowadays, modern days, we tend to think, you got the director, you got a screenwriter, you got the everything's totally divided. You know what I mean? Like everybody has a role to play on the production. Well, back then, a lot of these things were still being formed. Around the turn of the 1900, 1910, 1920, even 20 years in, it wasn't like set in stone that, one person was the director and one person was doing casting, one person was doing it didn't work that way. You know what I mean? The film was made by a huge team of people, and the person who might have been building the set could also be writing the screen. Like, there was no division of like, you do this whole role and that's the only thing you were going to do.
Yeah.
Because remember all these guilds, screenwriter guilds, acting guilds, and all these unions, screen actor union, whatever those, none of those things had appeared yet, right?
Mm-mm.
And so in these days of silent films, especially the silent comedies, you basically had a typical comedy troupe or a company, like the Biograph or I forgot, but there's a lot of competing ones in the same time periods. They would often have a team of people sort of creating almost like what would be equivalent of today's TV series when they do a writing room. If you're writing TV today, you usually have a series of 5 to 10 writers. And then writer 1, you write episode 2, writer 3, write episode 3, on and on and on. Everybody gets assigned an episode and they write it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Okay.
That's how modern TV works. So, but that's how the silent comedies worked back then. You had a team of gagmen, they call it, somewhere around 5 to 10 people, and everybody threw ideas against the wall, saying, "What if you did this? What if you?" And the funniest ideas always stuck. So it wasn't like Buster Keaton created every single 100% of the data for all of his movies. It was like he contributed, certainly had a big input, but then he had person B, person C, person D. They all threw things out in the open.
Yep.
And whatever's the funniest ended up being on the screen. Right? It's highly collaborative. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Makes sense.
So that's the thing about these movies. It's not like one person is doing everything. It's one person plus a team of gagmen doing stuff. And when he was a hired man, he was part of the gagman team for the Arbuckle shorts. So before this movie, in 1917 through 1920, he worked with Arbuckle on a series of 14 shorts, right? And he was one of the gagmen. So it could be a flame of 5, 10 people, and you might have idea A, this person idea B, and they made their shorts that way. But you don't always get the directing credit, as it were,
Mm-hmm.
But in this situation, he did. So this was to be his first, but then he felt like it wasn't high quality enough. So he shelved it for later, and then he went on to make. He actually tried to do this short before he made his first feature, called The Saphead. So after this he went up to film The Saphead for Metro Pictures in 1920. And then after that, he started doing these other shorts, including stuff like 1 Week. So, I think that's how it worked. Maybe I'm getting all the numbers. Yeah, so he filmed that. Maybe they did it all concurrently. It's not really totally clear. Yeah, I think he might have made 1 Week, and then he did Saphead. That's what it was. These are different dates. Okay, so any other thoughts about The High Sign? before we move on to 1 week?
Yeah, not really. I mean, as much as I liked it for an opening, I don't know. For me, there's not as much that's remarkable besides of what we talked about. I mean, obviously with the house, that's crazy, and this physics that goes along with it. I don't know. It just, I know we mentioned this before we started. I thought my favorite was the haunted house, but we'll get to that eventually, so no worries.
Yeah, we'll get to that next week. The next one is called 1 Week in 1920, and this is the one where he felt like it was a much better quality and represented everything that he wanted to put into a comedy short. So that's what happened. So this one stars himself, directed, another co-directed, written and directed by both him and working with Edward Cline. Production, and this one has the co-star Sybil Seeley, who actually went on to co-star with him in The Scarecrow, I think, and also where does she end up? She also appeared in the Convict 13, I think.
I thought she was really good. I actually looked her up because I said, "Oh, is this one?" You know.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of her story. She made a bunch of movies with Buster Keaton, and then kind of retired after she got married and had kids. So
Yeah, it doesn't say much online about her.
that's what happened. So she ended up getting married and then had a baby, and that's it. That was the end. So
Oh boy.
But she was 20 years old when she did this one. So
yeah. So this is the plot summary is that this movie plot wise is actually a kind of a satire on a Ford Motor Company documentary called Homemade in 1919. And that documentary is talking about prefabricated houses. So the short itself is like basically a couple gets married and they can build a house in a week. And then in that documentary, they show you the newlyweds' first task is to build a house, literally. So that was a real thing. And then Keaton saw it and was like, oh, well, I'm going to make a parody of it called 1 Week. And then in this film, they use Model T, paying homage to Ford. But anyway, so that's the whole sort of context of it. And the story is that, the newlywed, they get married, have some adventures, and then they build their home. And that's kind of the short itself. I think this is probably my favorite Buster Keaton work, maybe of all time. And I think I've seen everything he's done or had done when I was going through his filmography with whatever was available a few decades ago.
All right.
And the reason I like it is because the speed at which it's not just a frantic pace, but it's got this rhythm to the short that I don't think he quite regains even in his longer movies. His longer movies basically is a collection of series of shorts. If you've seen any of his other feature films.
Right. Like The General.
Yeah, in some ways, yeah. And it's really hard to kind of get away from that if you come from this background. But I think in terms of the end-to-end entertainment, I feel like this is just, there's something magical about this particular one. Both in the Sybil Seeley's chemistry with Buster Keaton. I don't think any of the other couples he stars with after this, or like any of the other ones beyond it, is like the same. Yeah, there's something unique about their chemistry that it translates on screen.
I agree.
That none of the other ones.
I noticed that too.
Yeah,
she's very charming.
Yeah, and there's something about the two of them on screen. It was perfect. So, but on top of that, it's just a hilarity of like trying to build a home, right to get married, and it's like, what happened to the honeymoon? I guess this is the honeymoon, but so, and then of course the house is built lopsided.
Yeah, because So because that other guy
The rejected suitor.
sabotaged
Yeah.
Yeah.
sabotaged them.
But
I felt so bad for them. I thought this one should have been called Hard Luck. It would have made more sense.
yeah. But everything that goes wrong with building a house does, right? It's the house prefab houses come in crates, sort of like IKEA, of the way of building a house, and you follow instructions and use the numbers and all that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the rejected suitor person secretly renumbers some of them, which screws up the way the house is supposed to be constructed. I think he built, in real life, in production, he built 3 separate houses. One for the initial sort of first and second wall flipping around gag, as well as a few other exterior ones. And then the second one's for the spinning one during the storm. And the third one was for like when everybody's going in and around the house. So it's three separate house sets. And then they had to destroy one at the end with the train. So
Right.
Yeah, that was pretty insane.
yeah, I mean everything about that represents who Buster Keaton is from a performance perspective, from a co-star chemistry perspective, from a set design perspective, from an engineering perspective, from just the sheer sort of comedic, I think, element perspective, and also just the sheer stunt, craziness of the stunt. Like he would just go from the second floor and just fall down to the ground level. I don't understand how you don't get injured, but apparently he's like,
yeah,
you just figure out a way to land. I was like, really? Well, I don't
Made
think
of
that's
rubber.
quite true, but whatever. So yeah. So that's 1 week. I found this one to be his most charming, the most effective representation of who he was about.
Yep.
Any other thoughts from you guys?
No. I mean, it's just really enjoyable.
It's really entertaining, yeah.
Yeah. And that's talking about his ingenuity again, just making a house that spins on a giant dais. I mean, that's pretty... you have to really think about how you're going to do that. Or just like how big that has to be to get your prop house to move around. I don't know. I just thinking about it's 100 years ago. So like, what are they doing? It's not like it's cranes or any, it's all manpower.
Yeah, but I would say there were a lot of carpentry, woodworking, and that hasn't, that's been around for thousands of years, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like the ingenuity of that is just based on what he wanted and desired the screen to film. And I think that's the genius part, that he's able to capture things that are visually interesting that other people may or may not be able to replicate,
It was for the time she was making it. It was a pretty complicated scene with they must have these giant fans blowing all this,
Wind and rain.
the wind and the rain and everything.
all the effects,
blowing
of
around
course.
the effects.
Yeah, all of that.
As well as him jumping into the wall of a moving, giant moving set piece. When he was trying to jump through the door and he was hitting the wall instead. I mean,
Yeah, it's pretty crazy stunts.
yeah.
There is a kind of a risque a little bit scene because Sybil Seeley was 18 and she was in a bathtub and she dropped the soap.
And they covered the
Yeah.
camera with a hand. Like, no.
Yeah, I can't see that part.
That was so funny.
It's a pre-haze code, that's why. It's a joke, inside joke.
Exactly, but it was so funny. I mean, it's like, and she looks at the screen. It's breaking the fourth wall.
Yep.
And she's like, I don't know why you're watching. And then they cover her with a hand, and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it was a joke on the audience for sure.
Yeah. All right, well, if you guys don't have anything else, we can move on to the next one. Convict 13. You guys good with 1 week?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's probably my favorite of the bunch. It's the most entertaining one for me. Convict 13 is about this, I guess, golfer who, tried to play golf but was so inept at it that he knocked himself unconscious. And meanwhile, nearby, a prisoner escaped Convict 13 and exchanged his prisoner's clothes with this golfer character from Buster Keaton, and henceforth, from there on, Buster Keaton has to run away from the authorities because they think he's the Convict 13. And hilarity ensues, essentially. But what about this one? I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, it just a lot of stunts. I don't know, the whole setup where he's supposed to be hung because Convict 13's date of execution is the same day he gets thrown into jail. I don't know. I was just kind of impressed how when they built up that set, they had, I don't know, I was assuming it was a trampoline hidden within the shadow as Buster Keaton jumped up and down. But that's still scary. I mean, anytime where, you have to have someone be hanged like that, even if it's a gag, I'm just like, oh my god, so many things could go wrong. Whether it's now or then, just like, ugh.
Yeah, I'm not sure back then there were a lot of sort of safety precautions and laws and any of those things. It's kind of still the early days. In terms of life-risking effects, it's very much still Wild Wild West in many, many ways. I don't think a lot of those measures, I think they're starting to at this point, but they're not going to be more solidified until much later in maybe a few decades even. I don't know the history of that, but if I had to guess, it's got to be at least a few decades from that time forth.
Yeah,
when people start
the 40s.
Yeah, when people start to kind of, in fact, that's what happened to Buster actually after the talkies in the 30s, and he contracted himself up to MGM, and he did some of the gags. Well, the MGM people were like, "You can't do these anymore, not the way you've been doing," and they had stunt doubles doing it, and he was like, "What?" So even then, the sort of risky feeling, he was kind of a little bit like the Tom Cruise of his days. I don't know if you know, the Tom Cruise is sort of modern day, not Buster Keaton, but more like he likes to take risks, even though he doesn't have to. Like those Mission Impossible movies, he'll jump out of the plane and do skydiving a bunch of times or hang off of a building for movies, and just generally doing crazy stunts, practical effects, right?
Yeah, especially since he broke his leg on one of those stunts too.
Yeah, so like he's, but again, like Buster's been doing that for hundreds of years ago. So, anyways, so I think that's the thing, is that it's evolved. The industry continues to grow and change and evolve, even during the time he's been making movies, and transition from silence to talkies. But other than that, this is the movie where that scene I think Lily brought up earlier, where he was marching, and that reminds me a lot of the Bugs Bunny cartoons, right? Because clearly it's not realistic, but it's meant to be a gag, right? Where so the gag is he marches down the road. I mean, he's running away from the I guess the police or cops who are chasing him to try to capture him from the escaped convict, and as the cops kind of gang up behind him, they sort of march into a three line formation, and Buster would then march backwards, and they all march backwards and back forwards as if they're kind of a military drill, and he'd do that like one or two times. That's the gag.
I found that to be kind of weird, funny, in a mildly funny, but weird.
Yeah, I mean, remember, this is not supposed to be, realistic. This is the...
No, of course not. Of course not. But it reminded me of Mel Brooks.
Right. Who has said in the past that Buster inspired him for many things, for especially silent movie that he did. So, yeah. Highly influential, right? Buster Keaton. On many, many things afterwards. There's a gag in here for the, let's see, which scene was this? There was a scene with the sledgehammer, and I gotta think, I mean, that's gotta be like a prop sledge towards the end when all the prisoners were kind of, and the guards were basically interchanged, and there's a bunch of people using sledgehammers to knock each other out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would hope so, unless they just do. I mean, the phrase is called a nap, but that's more when you hit somebody. I don't know, just like a whole bunch of false naps and stuff where you swing it close, like and then they
Very
fall.
cartoonish. That's what I felt about this one. Very much like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Many of these are, right?
Yep.
Even I think even for the people watching it in that
I
time.
I think it has to be. They have to be fake hammers
Oh, yeah.
because they swung them so fast.
Right. It's also sped up
Yeah.
though. You got to think about that too. The film rate of if you filmed at like 14 frames a second or something.
Oh, I see what you're
like,
saying.
yeah, the speed is still. It's either film a little under cranked a little, and then they'll crank it higher and play back, or something like that.
But the big guy was actually hitting them with it, and
That's sped up a little bit.
you can't hit someone gently enough with a sledgehammer.
Yeah, but that's still sped up a little bit. I think that's for the effect. So. Okay, so if there isn't anything else, we can move on to the next one.
Did this one end in a dream? Like he was dreaming about the whole thing?
That's
was the
a
one
good
thing I didn't
question.
understand
Yeah,
about
it
the
did.
end.
Many of these end up in dreams.
Yeah.
One thing or another. Either the entire thing is a dream, or like the last few bits are dreams. Like the haunted house, which is next week. But the last bit about going to heaven, and a spoiler alert, but there's a bit at the end, and that wasn't real. That was just a dream, which is very frequent apparently with all these shorts. And actually, not just Buster Keaton, but just all silent film comedy shorts. They just, the interplay between reality and dreams is very thin. That wall is very thin, I think. I mean, you could argue the entire short is a dream, filmically speaking, So. Any other thoughts about this particular one before we move on?
Nope.
No, not this one.
So the next one's Neighbors, where Buster Keaton and this character played by Virginia Fox, they play young lovers who live in...
Did we skip Scarecrow?
I think that's the last one.
Oh, okay. We're going to hold Scarecrow to last?
I guess, is that... You want to talk about that next too? Or
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, yeah. Neighbors, is, all these are two reelers, which is... a reel is about 10-ish minutes, so it's about usually 10, 20 minutes. This one's about 18 minutes, and it's about two lovers who are basically neighbors who live in a tenant kind of apartment separated by a fence, and they pass notes to each other, and then the families don't want them to be married, and they ended up, I guess, suing each other and demand to be, and then the judge says, you can get married, and at the wedding, hilarity ensues.
Yep.
They all end with hilarity ensues.
It's funny that I immediately thought Romeo and Juliet with
Yes.
this
Yep,
one.
same.
Certainly there's elements of that.
The West Side Story, which was based off of Romeo and Juliet, just because of the high rises. It was like, oh,
Yep.
but West Side Story didn't exist yet. Oops.
Yeah.
I loved using the clothesline like a zip line, going from building to building.
Yeah. There was I don't know, this one wasn't really a favorite of mine either. I don't know, there was just a lot going on, which is pretty, I don't know, it's just, I never liked Romeo and Juliet, maybe that's probably why, I don't know, it's just like, it's so overdone, and I never thought Romeo and Juliet were that good for each other. They met for one day, and I was just like, whoa, like, my favorite play from Shakespeare is Othello. You know what I mean? It's just like, Romeo and Juliet, but tell me about Othello, and I'll listen.
I think, Lily, one of these days, you should if there's a performance of this nearby, especially comedy. I don't know if you've done that before, but if you're able to attend one of these as a live with a live orchestra and a live audience, And here's the reason why is because like sitting at home and just like watching it, it's not going to be funny.
Yeah.
But if you watch it with an audience, their laughter will cause you to laugh at it. If that makes sense.
Contagious laughter.
It's not just that. I think there's an element of what the audience is actually contributing to the comedy of these movies.
No doubt.
And if you were an audience in those days, people would just, chuckle, laugh, because there's a lot more context that they're more familiar with, which we're not anymore. We're very far removed. But even as far as we are removed, almost, actually 100 years, right? 1920, 2020, right? That's 100 years.
Yeah, 100.
So 100 years now removed.
1 century.
Yeah, so from this context of this movie, and that's okay. But I think when you have an audience in there, what one person finds funny could potentially change the perspective of what you find is funny, I've had some experiences that when watching these silent films and the audience, when I watch it at home, it's kind of like, I always go back to this, but Metropolis is great. We should get to that one of these days. But I was just like, it's an okay movie, but watching it with an audience completely transformed my own sort of perspective about the movie.
Yeah, because actually on this one, I did watch it on YouTube.
Right.
I don't know, I was looking them up just to make sure that Canopy and YouTube, they were the same ones. But this one in particular, it did have a live score, and I could hear the audience too. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
To be sort of laughing with them too. But
exactly.
I don't know. It's still you're right. It's not the same experience.
Yeah.
Because where I volunteer, one of the theaters, they were supposed to be having another silent film with the Wurlitzer organ this season, but stupid COVID got in the way.
Yeah.
And they just shut down the theater forever.
Forever? Like they're never going to reopen?
Well, they will, but it's going to just, feels like forever.
Yeah.
Until we can have fun.
Well, certain
Besides
places have
podcasts.
shut down forever is what I'm saying. Like certain sort of, original places, public tenant, they're like, due to something happening, they're never going to reopen it because the business is gone, If you're a small business, your cash flow and the way you do your business isn't huge. So with a 2 month rather, without any profit or income, like your business could just disappear, So
yeah.
Anyways, getting back to this is that I do think that movies like this one, as melodramatic, and as a comedy, it will often benefit from. But again, it's really hard nowadays. It's just not a normal sort of thing that gets trot out and brought back out to be played in public. As well, obviously now, but even like in a non-COVID situation, pandemic situation, I think that's not a normal thing to have it be commonly brought back out. The good news is that Boston's one of the top 10 densely populated metropolitan cities in America, and so we have a lot more chances than, let's say,
Kansas City.
Yeah, something like that. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Well, actually, those places are actually at the heart of some of the silent film festivals, actually. But because, funnily enough, the heartland of America tends to get a ton of these silent movie type stuff. That's where they made a lot of profits. There's something American about these type of shorts. I don't know what it is, but historically has been sort of huge, depending on certain geographic region. But if you're like in super remote places, I don't know what, but Canada, middle of nowhere. Well, that's gonna be tough. So
it's kind of like Dawson City, though. When we watched it,
Yeah.
I actually was thinking Dawson City was in Kansas before we watched it, because I had heard there was something there too, but it must have just been Dawson City.
Right.
For some reason I thought, because Kansas is geographically the center of the states, that's where all the silent films were. So I was like, oh, okay, whatever. Yeah.
So that's it for Neighbors. If you have any thoughts, we don't have any thoughts, we can move on to Scarecrow. Is that okay?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So the Scarecrow is a 1920 film where Buster plays kind of a farmhand who, the other tall guy that kind of looks like Arbuckle, his name is Joe Roberts.
Oh, okay.
So he's kind of playing the archetypical sort of, he's kind of the contrast to Buster's character.
Yeah.
One's big, one's small, one's more, I guess, brutish a little bit, and then the others. Anyways, they're trying to vie for the love of the farmer's daughter, who's this time played by Sybil Seeley, and this is the one with the Arbuckle's real life pet dog, named Luke, that he believes is Rabbit, and then he gets chased by the dog around multiple structures.
I love the dog jumping over the wall. I was like, wow, that dog can jump.
And I'm sure it's been trained too at some point in time. Yeah.
It was so funny that the dog was eating the pie, and so he thought it was Rabbit because it had the foam all over its mouth, and he ran, and it chased him, being a playful gesture.
Yeah.
The whole time it was chasing him, it was just wanted to play.
Yeah. He says, "Mad dog."
Mad dog.
I thought some commentary persons, I forgot where I've heard of this from, said that there's some sort of like a short film trilogy of Buster Keaton's with the Sybil Seeley character. So you could view the Scarecrow as in terms of plot, as the beginning of that romance. With Buster and Joe Roberts trying to compete for the hand, and at the end, he accidentally proposes, right? But then they get married at the end of the short, and then 1 week picks up that story as the married newlyweds and then building their house. 1 week, and then I think it was Convict 13 is where kind of it ends up being somewhere as the third part of the trilogy, as it were, of shorts.
Yeah, I like that.
At least that's what their thought process was. It's the cinematic Busterverse of the 1920s.
Busterverse.
Yeah. So other than that, what do you think about sort of all of this? There's a lot of, I guess, misunderstandings when it comes to silent comedies. Where Buster's character is being misunderstood by accident when he's kneeling down, tying shoes, and then the other character thought he was proposing. I feel like a lot of the comedy tropes all revolves around just basic misunderstandings.
Yes,
that makes sense.
I would agree. A lot of it.
Yeah,
and not just his work, but actually
many silent works. Yeah.
And even a lot of modern works. I mean, all the 1960s, 70s sitcoms worked off the same sort of principle.
Right. Any other comments about this particular one?
I liked where the father hid his booze.
In the Scarecrow. I liked how he played the Scarecrow. That he vanished because he was the Scarecrow.
Yeah.
And then, it totally reminded me of Wizard of Oz, except that he was being covert. Kick one in the butt, he blames the other one. Kicks the other one in the butt, he blames the other guy. Until the pole collapses on him, and then.
Yep.
I like how he stands up and he tries to pretend to be the Scarecrow still.
Again, very, very much like a cartoon in some ways.
Yes.
Which, a lot of the Warner products do end up, I feel like, basically paying homage to both Buster and also other, silent film comedy stars of its day. So.
Absolutely.
Any parting thoughts about this first set collection of shorts?
I loved it.
Me too.
Yeah, it was definitely a turn from all the other.
We were definitely primed for it.
That is for sure. Now the question is, how much more can we make of the one thing?
Yeah. I think what I liked too about this particular setup was that the comedy can transcend over 100 years. I mean, I was laughing a lot during
Me too.
these films, and I'm glad I'm laughing at them because they truly are funny, and the comedy does last.
Right.
Even if, the silent films rot away, the humor's there.
Yep.
Because it's situational comedy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always very dependent on the sort of the cultural context of its time. If it's too dependent on that, we wouldn't know what it is. It would be out of time, out of place.
I mean, you don't hear the jokes, so obviously you have to physically do the joke.
Right. The gag.
The gag.
Yeah.
Completely agree with you, Lily.
There's a couple of more sets beyond this. We're going to chop it up a little bit more, so we'll be kind of trying to complete this set. This is from Kino Lorber. They released this sometime close to a decade ago, or maybe a little bit after that, as a 3-disc set. And I think it includes almost all of these shorts that he made from the 1920s to 23, maybe? I didn't check it the last. I haven't looked at this in a long time. But disc 1 had like 7 shorts. Disc 2 had the same sets through there, and then disc 3 then kind of completed the whole set. But since that time, I've noticed, I went back to the website from Kino. I noticed they don't even have this sort of DVD or Blu-ray set anymore. In fact, they have a complete set of, I think, the Art Buckle shorts do now. Let me double check. I thought I'll link this in the show notes, but I could have sworn that they finally included additional. So now it's like a 5-disc set.
Wow.
Instead of a 3-disc kit. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
It is.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, that's what happened. So the 5-disc set, the 3-disc original set that I got was only from 1920 to 1923, which is the films directed by Buster Keaton and Eddie Cline, with some exceptions. But so that's a collection of something like 20 some odd shorts or so, and then there's 14 shorts from the Art Buckle Keaton collaborations.
Wow.
A total of 32. So that's cool. I think that completes the set for them, and then they go on to separate careers. But Keaton then starts to do more feature films, and then his career kind of diverges after the general. But yeah, later on we'll also get to some of the features too.
I can't wait for that.
Yeah, the features are more self-contained, but like I said, they're more like a collection of shorts. These silent film comedy stars, they just can't get away from the short structure,
And nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah, it's just there's something they're used to, is all.
Yep.
All right, folks. Any parting thoughts before we conclude today?
No, I think I said what I wanted
That's
to
great.
a little bit ago.
Sounds like a plan. We'll see you guys again next week, and thank you, listeners, for listening to us. Taking a dive into the comedies, other than General, which was also Buster Keaton, funnily enough. I don't think we've done a lot of comedies, so we're going to be all up in comedies in the next few recordings that we're going to have, in the podcast that we're going to have. If you like more of our stuff, please leave a review or some star ratings at Apple iTunes. Not iTunes, they don't call it anymore. Apple Podcasts, they call it nowadays. As well as Stitcher or any other platforms that you're finding us. Any feedback would be much appreciated. You can find more of our podcast at Watching Silent Films, plural, watchingsilentfilms.wordpress.com. And you can email us at the same, watchingsilentfilms@gmail.com. And that's it for today. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, Bob and Lily. And we'll talk again next time. Thank you. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Or good day,
Night.
depending on what time.